We were in the courtroom. The air was thick and stale, smelling like old paper and quiet desperation. My father, Robert, a man who saw his family as employees and his wife as a failed asset, was sneering. His voice boomed, echoing in the quiet room. "You'll walk out with nothing." He pointed a thick finger at my mother, Elena, a woman who had been worn down to a whisper by decades of his financial and emotional control. She trembled, her entire body shaking, and her hand was palsied as she reached for the pen to sign the settlement, the document that would end her 30-year marriage with pennies. I couldn't watch. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly on the floor. The tension snapped to me. "Your Honor, please open the envelope." My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. I placed a single, unremarkable manila envelope on the judge's bench. The judge, a weary-looking man, sighed, clearly annoyed at the interruption. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the first page. Then they widened. He looked up at me, then back at the paper. A small chuckle escaped him, which he tried to stifle. He couldn't. He leaned right into the microphone, a grin spreading across his face as he whispered, "Oh, this is brilliant." I watched my father's face. The smug, triumphant mask dissolved, replaced by a sickly, pale confusion. His bravado was gone, replaced by the dawning, unfamiliar horror of losing control. It all started 6 weeks earlier. We were at a steakhouse, the kind with dark wood and lighting so dim it felt like a cave. This was the moment Robert had chosen to present his final offer for the divorce. He slid a thin sheaf of papers across the table, the steak sauce on his plate perilously close. He was loud, boisterous, performing for the other diners. "This is more than generous," he declared. My mother just stared at the papers, her face ashen. I saw the numbers. They were an insult. "Dad, this isn't fair," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "This isn't a legal division of assets. This is..." He cut me off with a loud, barking laugh. "Maya, please," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Stick to your little Navy paperwork. Ensign Paperclip. That's what you are." That nickname. It was his favorite. It was the one he used when I graduated Ox. The one he used when I passed the bar. The one he used to erase every achievement and paint me as a glorified secretary in a uniform. "This is the big leagues," he said, jabbing a finger at my mom. "Your mother signs, or I'll see her on the street." He chuckled, convinced he'd put me in my place. He had no idea that Ensign Paperclip was the public call sign for a lieutenant commander in Navy JAG, specializing in forensic accounting and asset seizure. He just challenged me in the one field I was an apex predator. To understand the reckoning in that courtroom, you have to understand the two lives I was living. My father's universe revolved around his own voice. I remember this one family barbecue. The smell of lighter fluid and overcooked meat thick in the air. Robert was holding court by the grill, a beer in one hand, tongs in the other, bragging about his complex international shipping deals. He loved using words like logistics and supply chain as if he'd invented them. Our relatives and his yes-man friends would nod along, mesmerized by his tales of outsmarting customs and navigating treacherous foreign markets. He was, in his own mind, a titan of industry, a self-made man who commanded the world. He spotted me standing by the patio door, quiet, just observing. He grinned and called me over. "Here she is," he boomed, pulling me into a one-armed, awkward hug. "Maya, when are you going to get out of that glorified Cub Scout uniform and get a real job? Something that actually pays?" The crowd chuckled. I just smiled, a tight, practiced expression I'd perfected over 2 decades. He gave me a rough pat on the head, the kind you give a dog. "Ah, you just don't get it, sweetie," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending tone. "It's a man's world. Stick to your files." I just nodded, the familiar burn rising in my throat. I saw my mother across the yard, forcing a smile, her eyes begging me not to start anything. I didn't. I just went and got a glass of water, the internal ledger in my head clicking over with another entry, another dismissal, another casual erasure of my entire life. What he called files was a different world. It was a world he couldn't even imagine. It was a sterile, windowless room called a SEAF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. The Only sound was the constant low hum of air scrubbers and servers. There were no barbecues here. There was no bragging. There was just the immense crushing weight of the work. I wasn't Ensign Paperclip. I wasn't a glorified secretary. I was the one who wrote the asset seizure orders that brought down men 10 times more powerful than my father. My commanding officer, Admiral Hayes, was a man who didn't tolerate fools and who saw me as his sharpest legal weapon. I'd walk into his office, and there was no condescension, just expectation. I remember briefing him on our last big target. Sir, the target commingled the funds through 3 separate shell corporations, all registered in jurisdictions with zero transparency. I pointed to a chart, but he got sloppy. He used the same registered agent in the Caymans for all 3. We can pierce the corporate veil and seize the entire $50 million portfolio. Hayes just nodded, his eyes fixed on the data. Make it happen, Commander. That's it. No pat on the head. Just a command that trusted me to execute a multi-million-dollar international seizure. So, 6 weeks ago, back in that quiet hotel room after the disastrous steakhouse dinner, I spread my father's generous offer across a cheap bedspread. The anger and the hurt were still there, but something else was clicking on. The professional. I looked at the numbers, and a different kind of coldness settled in. They were too clean. He wasn't just lowballing my mother, he was hiding things. And he was doing it with an arrogance that left a trail. I recognized the legal structure. I recognized the specific state he'd incorporated in, the way the trusts were set up. It was the exact same framework I had just spent 3 months dismantling for the Department of Defense. It was a structure used by arms dealers and smugglers to wash their money. And my father? My father was using it to hide his boat in his condo from my mother. My father had spent my entire life telling me I didn't understand his world. The irony was, I understood it better than he did. I tracked men like him for a living, and he had just made himself my next target. The rage from the steakhouse had cooled into something hard and sharp. Resolve. I wasn't going to fight my father on his terms. I was going to bring him onto mine. I called my mother's local lawyer, a timid man who sounded completely overwhelmed and ready to lose. I didn't raise my voice. I gave him 2 simple, precise instructions. You're going to file a single motion, I said, my voice flat. A request for final sworn financial disclosure. Nothing else, and when we get to the final hearing you are going to cede your time to me. That's all. He was confused, but he agreed. This was the part my father always mocked, my little Navy paperwork. He had no idea what that paperwork really was. This wasn't hacking. That's messy. This was surgery. For 2 weeks I sat in the dark, my laptop the only light, and I hunted. I didn't need to break laws. I just needed to read the ones he'd already broken. I used my knowledge of international finance law and cross-referenced in corporation databases. My father, in his arrogance, believed he was a shark in a global ocean. He had no idea Leviathan was tracking him from the deep. It took me 36 hours, but I found it. Of course I found it. A newly incorporated LLC in the Cayman Islands. And the name made my stomach turn. Rem. Logistics. Robert. Elena. Maya. He had put our initials on his crime. This wasn't just hiding assets. This was a trophy. This was his final, sickening joke. I saw the wire transfers. Over $8 million, 74 of their marital assets, siphoned away after he had filed for divorce. It wasn't just immoral. It was a textbook case of fraudulent conveyance. I didn't send this to my mother's lawyer. This was my evidence, my procedure, and my jurisdiction. I printed everything. The incorporation documents from the Caymans, the time-stamped wire transfer receipts, and a single highlighted page from the state legal code, the one covering perjury in a sworn financial disclosure. I sealed it all in that one simple manila envelope. I bought a plane ticket, and I walked into that courtroom, my uniform pressed ready for inspection. My father was coming to court for a victory lap. He was about to swear on a Bible that his fraudulent disclosure was the truth. He had no idea he wasn't just walking into a divorce hearing. He was walking into an audit, conducted by me. And so, we were back in the courtroom. It felt like the final act of a play my father had been writing for 30 years. He walked in with that familiar, repellent swagger, slapping his lawyer on the back. He sat down at his table and winked at my mother. A gesture of such profound condescension it made my stomach clench. My mother Elena just stared at her hands, which were folded so tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She looked like a ghost, an empty vessel, waiting for the final blow. I sat behind her, my back ramrod straight. My own uniform felt like armor, but he didn't even see it. He just saw Ensign Paperclip. His lawyer, a man who mirrored my father's oily confidence, wrapped things up. And so, Your Honor, we believe this settlement is, frankly, more than generous. The judge nodded, looking bored. Mr. Jensen, please rise. My father stood, all performative sincerity. Do you swear, under penalty of perjury, that these documents represent your full and complete financial status? Your assets? Your liabilities? Everything? My father placed his hand on the Bible. He looked directly at my mother, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on his lips. Absolutely, Your Honor, he boomed. Every last cent. The lie hung in the air, thick and toxic. His lawyer slid the settlement papers in front of my mother. Just sign here, Elena. And that's when he couldn't help himself. The final twist of the knife. He leaned forward and hissed, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "You'll walk out with nothing." A small, broken sound escaped my mother's throat. She picked up the pen, her hand shaking so violently she could barely hold it. I saw the ink tremble over the signature line. This was it. This was the moment. The culmination of every ignored achievement. Every dismissive sweetie. Every pat on the head. This was the car he bought himself when he said we couldn't afford my college textbooks. This was the men's world speech at the barbecue. It all coalesced into this single terrible moment of signature. I stood. The scrape of my chair was the only sound in the room. Your Honor, I have one item for the court's consideration. My father's head snapped toward me, his face contorted in pure rage. Sit down, Maya. This is grown-up business. His lawyer chimed in. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This is his daughter. She has no standing. The judge looked at me, his gaze annoyed. Ma'am, who are you? I took a steadying breath. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and removed my white combination cover, my navy cap, and placed it perfectly on the bar in front of me. I looked past my father, past the sputtering lawyer, and directly at the judge. Lieutenant Commander Maya Jensen, United States Navy JAG Corps, bar number 88,451. The entire room's atmosphere changed. The judge sat up, his boredom evaporating instantly. I am here not as a family member, I continued, my voice calm and ringing, with an authority he had never heard, but as an officer of the court. I have material evidence of perjury and financial fraud directly related to these proceedings. My father's mouth was open. His lawyer looked like he'd been slapped. Your Honor, I protest. The judge held up a hand, his eyes now fixed on me. Approach, Commander. I walked forward, the clicks of my heels the only sound. I placed a single manila envelope on his bench. This is what my father, Mr. Jensen, failed to disclose. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge tore open the envelope. I watched. His face, annoyance, confusion. His eyes scanned the first page. The second, his eyebrows shot up. Then, the reaction I will treasure for the rest of my life. He stifled a laugh. He looked up at me, then back at the paper. He couldn't hold it in. He leaned into the microphone, a grin spreading across his face, and whispered, "Oh, this is brilliant." My father's face went from rage to a sickly, pale confusion. What? What is it? What's so funny? The judge's smile vanished, replaced by an expression as cold and hard as steel. He leaned into the microphone, and his voice boomed. Mr. Jensen, your memory seems to have failed you. You swore under oath that this disclosure was complete. But you've forgotten something. Small. Just a minor detail. He held up the paper. You've forgotten the $9.7 million you transferred to Rem Logistics, a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, 4 weeks ago, after you filed for divorce. The color drained from my father's face. He looked small. Rem, he stammered. His lawyer snatched a paper from the judge's clerk, his own face turning ashen. Your Honor, this is irregular. This is privileged information. The judge slammed his gavel. What's irregular, he thundered, is blatant perjury in my courtroom. What's irregular is using a three-tier fraudulent conveyance structure identical to those on a federal asset forfeiture watch list. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen. Lieutenant Commander, he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. Your paperwork is the most meticulous and damning piece of forensic accounting I have ever seen. This settlement is nullified. Your Honor, my father pleaded. The judge ignored him. All assets, domestic and international, are hereby frozen pending a criminal investigation, which I am personally requesting from the U.S. Attorney's Office. He looked at my mother, who was staring at me, her eyes wide, tears of shock now streaming down her face. And I am awarding 100% of the discovered funds, all $8.7 million, to Mrs. Jensen as punitive damages. We are done here. My father had spent my whole life trying to teach me about power. In the end, all it took was one envelope to show him what true authority looked like. The gavel strike felt final, like a door slamming shut on my entire childhood. The courtroom erupted, not in applause, but in a flurry of panicked, high-pitched noise. My father Robert was sputtering. His face was a mottled, terrifying shade of red, and he was jabbing his finger at his lawyer, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Fix this! You have to fix this! What did she do?" His lawyer, the slick, confident man from an hour ago, was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase, his hands visibly shaking. He wouldn't even look at my father. He just kept muttering, "It's over, Robert. It's over." Court officers were already moving, standing near them, their presence a clear signal. I didn't watch them. I didn't care. My eyes were only on my mother. She was still sitting, frozen, her hand still hovering over the unsigned settlement. Tears streamed down her face, but these weren't the tears of a victim. They were tears of pure, unadulterated shock. I walked over to her, the sound of my heels on the marble floor the only thing I could hear. I stood in front of her, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. I saw her see me, really see me, maybe for the first time. Not as Ensign Paperclip, not as her quiet, invisible daughter, but as the person who had just saved her life. I didn't say, "Are you okay?" I didn't say it's over. I just held out my hand. She looked at my hand for a long second, as if it were a life raft. Then, her small, trembling fingers laced into mine. I squeezed, and she squeezed back, a grip surprisingly strong. I pulled her gently to her feet. We didn't look back. We didn't look at my father's crumbling empire or his apoplectic face. We just walked, hand in hand, out of the courtroom, past the scrambling lawyers, through the heavy wooden doors, and into the bright, indifferent sunlight of the hallway. We left all the chaos, all the noise, and all the years of pain behind us in that room. 1 year later, the air smells like damp earth, lavender, and freshly ground coffee. The sign outside the bright, airy storefront reads, "Elena's Garden." Mother. She's not Elena anymore. Not the ghost from the courtroom. She's Mrs. Jensen to her suppliers and Elena to her friends and customers. She looks 13 years younger, her hair cut stylishly, her face full of life and purpose. I watch her from a small cafe table in the corner, and she's confidently directing 2 employees, laughing as she arranges a complex floral order. This was it. This was the business she'd dreamed of opening, the one she gave up 32 years ago when she was told to be a supportive wife to a big, important man. I'm in my civilian clothes, but the promotion feels good. It's Commander Jensen now. The new authority rests comfortably. My mother finishes with her staff and comes over, sliding a croissant onto my plate. "You're too thin," she says, but she's smiling. Our relationship is different. The old, suffocating dynamic of victim and protector has vanished, replaced by something warm and easy. We're just 2 women, equals, talking about her new shipment of Dutch tulips and my upcoming assignment at the Pentagon. There's no fear in her voice. The constant thrumming anxiety that used to be the background music of our lives, it's just gone. The silence it left behind is peace. My phone buzzes on the table. A text from a number I don't recognize. My mother is talking about her plans to expand the herb garden, so I just glance at it. My breath hitches. It's him. Maya. I am in trouble. The feds, they're taking everything. The criminal investigation the judge started. They found things. Please. You know the law. You're my daughter. You have to help me. I read the message once, then twice. I waited for the old familiar swell of anger. I waited for the pain, the rage, the bitter satisfaction. Nothing came. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I just felt finished. It was like reading a memo about a case that had been closed for a year. It was just information, and it had no relevance to me. He wasn't asking for a daughter. He was asking for Ensign Paperclip. He was asking for the legal mind he'd mocked, the one he now saw as a tool he could use. I looked up at my mother, who was now excitedly explaining the difference between two types of roses, her face alive. This was my world. This was my reality. My father and his text message felt like a fax from a foreign country, from a life I didn't live anymore. Without a word, I held my thumb over the number. I slid my phone back into my pocket. The message unanswered. I smiled at my mother. They sound beautiful, Mom. Now, tell me more about the tulips. My father always believed the big leagues were about loud threats and hidden money. I learned that true power is quiet. It's the meticulous truth. It's the paperwork. If you've ever had to use your own quiet expertise to win a fight no one thought you could, share your story below. In this community, we always respect the expert in the room. Do subscribe.